Matthew 17, 1 through 13. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them. "Get up," he said. "Don't be afraid." When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, "Don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The disciples asked him, "Why then do the teachers of the law say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "To be sure, Elijah comes and will restore all things. But I tell you, Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but have done to him everything they wished. In the same way, the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands." Then the disciples understood that he was talking about John the Baptist. Matthew 17, 1 through 13. In the church calendar, Transfiguration Sunday is today. Today we read Matthew 17. This is what Matthew says about the Transfiguration. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Matthew 17, verse 2. Jesus' face shines like the sun, and his clothes become as white as the light. This is not a normal human experience. At the very least, it would seem that Jesus' disciples become afraid. In the church calendar, Transfiguration Sunday stands between the Epiphany season and the Lent season. The Epiphany season starts after Christmas and focuses on the appearance of Jesus as an adult who begins his ministry as teacher and Messiah. He is no longer the baby of Christmas. This Transfiguration Sunday provides further revelation of Jesus' identity and glory. This is how the Presbyterian Mission Agency in the U.S. describes the importance of Transfiguration Sunday. Transfiguration Sunday celebrates the glorious revelation of God in Jesus Christ and Christ's manifestation as the fulfillment of the law and the prophets. Jesus' radiant appearance on the mountaintop evokes the devouring fire of the glory of the Lord at Mount Sinai. Exodus 24, verse 17. Jesus' face shining like the sun and his clothes becoming dazzling white provokes fear in these disciples. That is only the beginning. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Matthew 17, verse 3. According to the Old Testament, Elijah does not die but is taken up into heaven by chariots and horses of fire. Moses is reported to have died on Mount Nebo, but no one knows where his grave is. Elijah and Moses is seen talking with Jesus on this mountain. A bright cloud then surrounds them. A voice is heard from the cloud. Matthew 17, verse 5. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." The cloud signifies that God is present. They also hear his voice. It is such a terrifying sight for them. Matthew tells us that the disciples fall face down to the ground, terrified. I believe I too would fall face down to the ground and terrified if I were Peter, James, or John. I remember going to the theaters in the early days of 3D IMAX and the special sound system. I was completely overwhelmed by these special features. It took me a while to get used to them. It is also a similar experience for the people of Israel as Moses comes down Mount Sinai, carrying the 2 tablets of God's law. Moses' face is radiant. This also creates fear in Aaron and the people of Israel. Like Jesus' disciples or the people of Israel, if we were to encounter the true glorious presence of God, we too would fall down to the ground in fear. Recently, we had the Soccer World Cup in Qatar. What an experience it was for us to see 32 nations coming together to compete for the trophy. God's glorious creation includes the richness of the different countries and the variety of languages. In 1966, the World Cup competition was held in England. England won the final against West Germany. A Christian author, Warren Roberts, shares his thoughts about Bobby Moore, the then captain of England, receiving the trophy from the Queen. Bobby Moore was the captain of England. He received the World Cup from Queen Elizabeth. England won the trophy in 1966. An interviewer later asked him to describe how he felt. He talked about how terrified he was as he approached Her Majesty because he noticed she was wearing white gloves, while his hand, which would soon shake the Queen's, was covered in mud from the pitch. As the triumphant captain walks along the balcony, he keeps wiping his hand on his shorts and then on the velvet cloth in front of the royal box in a desperate attempt to get himself clean. If Bobby Moore was worried about approaching the Queen with his muddy hands, how much more horrified should we be at the prospect of approaching God? Because of our sin, we are not just dirty on the outside, our hearts are unclean. God doesn't just wear white gloves. He's absolutely pure through and through. The voice of God in the cloud is overwhelming for Peter and his friends. They fall face down to the ground. They are terrified. As they are on the ground, they feel someone put his hand on their shoulders. They look up. They see that it is the hand of Jesus touching them. The hand does not terrify them. The hand of Jesus calms them down. Matthew 17, 7-8. But Jesus came and touched them. Get up, he said. Don't be afraid. When they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. Jesus speaks to them now without the brightness in his face. His clothes are no longer dazzling white. Moses and Elijah are gone. When they look up, they see no one except Jesus. It has become a quiet mountain. They feel that hand on their shoulders. It is the coming hand of Jesus. Jesus whispers these words to them. Get up, don't be afraid. Jesus calms Peter, James, and John down. Why are the words of Jesus so comforting? Why is the hand of Jesus so calming? Jesus has power to comfort them because God has empowered him to do so. During that frightening time in the cloud, the voice of God speaks. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Do you recognize these words? At Jesus' baptism, God says the same words. This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Jesus can come then in the presence of the holy and righteous God because Jesus is God's Son. Jesus is the beloved Son of God. In fact, as the Son of God, Jesus reveals God to the people. Jesus says to Peter, James, and God says to Peter, James, and John, listen to him. My beloved Son has come to reveal me. It is now quiet, it is now dark, it is now still. In their soul and heart, the disciples feel the peaceful presence of God. It is like the words of Psalm 46, verse 10. Be still and know that I am God. Debbie shares her experience. She's going through a tough time like the disciples on the mountain. She feels afraid. Then the words of Psalm 46, verse 10 appear to her like the calming hand of Jesus. Here is Debbie's story. I was going through a difficult time in my life, which often made me hopeless and afraid. I was ashamed of my feelings because I thought that as a Christian, I should have better response to my problems. Amid my hopelessness and fear, I was reminded of the words of David and the other authors of the Psalms. Their words are honest and heartfelt. Meditating on the Psalms has helped me to be more honest with God about my feelings. God desires a deeper relationship with us, and through our relationship with God, we are comforted and encouraged to keep going. God is our refuge. Be still and know that I am God. Though our problems may be overwhelming and beyond our control, we can rest assured that the God of Jacob is with us. As we read in Psalm 46, we only need to be still and acknowledge God's power and presence. We face a lot of struggles in life. There are a lot of problems. Each new moment presents us with yet another challenge. We hear all those voices around us putting pressure on us. During those troublesome times, God speaks the same words to us as God spoke to Peter, James, and John. This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. Be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. Therefore, when there is trouble all around us, we practice the art of listening for the still, small voice of God. We listen for the voice of Jesus in our hearts. We whisper the words of Jesus into our minds. And these are some of the words of Jesus. Surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. Matthew 28, verse 20. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. John 14, verse 27. The disciples are changed by this experience of the transfiguration. They have had a mountaintop experience with Jesus. As they come down the mountain, I'm sure they now feel discouraged. They will face the challenges of the world down below. Today is Transfiguration Sunday. Lent starts this Wednesday. It is Ash Wednesday. During Lent, we focus on the 40 days and 40 nights of Jesus in the desert. Yet now the disciples have a memory of this mountaintop experience, which they will share with people around them below. They have experienced life change and want to share it with their neighbors. The New Testament Greek word that is translated as the word transfiguration is also used for the word metamorphosis that we learn in our science classes at school. Metamorphosis is used to describe the process of transformation when a caterpillar goes through to become a beautiful butterfly. Libby has a daughter. When her daughter was 4, she was blessed to explain how a caterpillar changes into a butterfly. When our daughter was 4 years old, we received a chrysalis in a clear jar. I explained to her that it was God's plan for a caterpillar to change into a beautiful butterfly. We kept a close watch on it because we could already see the wings inside. Then one afternoon, we saw that the butterfly was halfway out. Hurriedly, we took the jar outside. The butterfly worked its way and stood on the rim of the jar, wobbling back and forth, hesitating. As it attempted to fly, it kept going up and down, almost hitting the ground. My daughter's hand slid into mine. "Do something, Mommy." Suddenly, the butterfly soared up and away. It struck me how we humans are often like that when we go through a major change, like moving into a new home, school, or job. We can feel wobbly and unsure in our efforts to adjust. But if I keep working at it, we eventually settle into our new way of life. But if we keep working at it, we eventually settle into our new way of life. God is an awesome creator who speaks to us through creation. I can look back on my life and recognize times when I was like that butterfly. But with God's help, I made it through difficult seasons of change, time and time again. Like Debbie, we can make it through the difficult seasons of change. We have experienced the transforming presence of Jesus. There are many times in our lives in which Jesus appears out of the blue. Jesus puts his gentle hand on us. Jesus whispers his grace into our ears. May we witness Jesus' transforming work in our lives. This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. Amen.